It's Friday, January 3rd. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. Happy New Year. It's a hell of a year to talk ball, and it's definitely a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is a man I have not talked ball with in, way too long. He's finally leaving the ivory tower of his newsletter. I know baseball season is on the horizon, so enough of that. Join me to talk a little ball today is Scott Pianowski. Scott, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, man. Yeah, I don't think we've talked since Deontay Johnson was still on the Steelers. It's been a while. So,
okay, it hasn't been that long, but at least 3 teams ago. Maybe now that he's on his 4th team in a calendar year, although new year, obviously.
Probably the last time he scored a touchdown was the last time we had a long, deep, in-depth conversation. So excited to do that. It's 2025 fantasy season. This is pretty much done, but we have a lot. We know some of you are playing for week 18. There are incentives to be won. Mike Evans has some money as a bag to go get. So, I wish we had a little bit more juice to the schedule this week, but there are some games that do matter. Obviously, there's a gigantic game at the end of the schedule. So I can't wait to see which 14-win team gets screwed in the NFC and has to go on the road in the first round of the playoffs. But it's been a fun season, and the playoffs are going to be outstanding. There are just some unbelievable matchups that we're on a collision course for. So if you're an NFL fan, I think you're pretty pumped right now.
I couldn't agree more with you. I am so gassed up about the playoff slate that is coming, but we don't know that slate just yet. As Scott mentioned, it's a little bit of a lackluster, maybe juiceless week 18. However, there are 2 real scenarios to watch: the AFC North, the NFC South, and then obviously the big game that Scott mentioned. We're going to break all of that down here on today's show, in addition to finishing with a little bit of the contract extension or contract incentives fun and some of those players to watch as the week winds down. But let's jump into our first section here, Scott. And these are the games that actually matter, the scenarios that actually matter. And that's mostly what we're going to talk through on this particular show. We're not going to break down, hey, what do you think Carson Wentz's connection with insert, Noah Gray? We're not going to be doing any of that. We are going to talk about the teams that still have something to play for here, playoff-wise, in Week 18. Let's start with the AFC North watch. We've got a couple of games here to break down, but let's start first. Cleveland at Baltimore. Obviously, what's at stake here is Baltimore clinches the AFC North division title and the number 3 seed with a win or a tie, or if in the next game that we talk about, the Steelers lose or tie that game with Cincinnati. But let's stick on this game here, Scott. Again, the Browns have had several different phases since we've last talked football, that's for sure. But Baltimore in this game, a lot to play for. Derrick Henry's got stuff on the line. Everybody's got stuff on the line here in Week 18. Even if it is a listless opponent there on the other side, I'm excited to watch the Ravens in this Week 18 matchup.
17.5-point favorites. You don't see that every day in the NFL. And the Ravens, you could argue they're the best team in the AFC. They're not going to get the number 1 seed. Of course, Kansas City has locked that up, and they can, basically send their players to Cabo Wabo if they want for a few weeks. Always a hard choice, by the way. What do you do when you've already clinched, right? You rust. We're always debating that stuff. But all Lamar Jackson has to do is make a playoff run, right? He's won the 2 MVPs. He's still got a puncher's chance of maybe stealing it from Josh Allen this year, although I do think voter fatigue will lead to Allen winning that award. But Jackson's put up the stats. He put up an MVP caliber season. So you would think the Ravens roll in this game. And I think the Ravens are going to the Super Bowl. I think this is their year. Yeah, I do. I don't buy the Chiefs thing sustaining long term. In Buffalo, Allen has covered up a lot of warts. There's a lot of problems with that team. And Baltimore, I think they're well set up. Henry, we know his career, he gets better. I realize fantasy managers were frustrated because he had a short touchdown drought in December, but his career profile is the YPC gets better month by month. Now we're in January, so we've advanced another month. I would think that Henry will be dynamic for the next month or so. Jackson's never been better. Zay Flowers, dynamic year. I know he didn't have the touchdowns for fantasy. It's funny how the Ravens, I think, had a great year. And at times for fantasy, it can be a little bit frustrating because you're trying to time the market on Mark Andrews. Flowers didn't score the touchdowns that we expected. Deontay Johnson didn't work out when he came in. So maybe it was more of a successful real life season than a fantasy season. And I know the defense, obviously the past defense, the secondary had injuries and there were just games they couldn't stop anything. Somehow the Browns won the first matchup when Jameis played out of his mind and the Ravens dropped 5 interceptions in that game. We won't see Jameis this week, but I think this is a blowout. And I think this is the year the Ravens go to the Super Bowl.
This is why I'm so excited to talk to you today, because it has been so long. I don't really know your takes on a lot of these teams and things like that. It's so interesting. If you just look at, one, just what a great ecosystem this Ravens offense has been. We talk about Derrick Henry, and historically, he does get better as the years wear on. This has been from a yards before contact per rush attempt, Scott. He's at 2.39 this year. The previous 3 years with the Tennessee Titans, 0.85, 0.79, 0.95. He's got just 1 year since his rookie year in Tennessee where he was over 1.0. So it has been everything that we possibly could have wanted it to be. Derrick Henry fitting in with this unique and electric Baltimore rushing ecosystem. I think you might be overselling a little bit, or underselling a little bit how close this MVP race is. I do think there are some voters that will wave away the fatigue because of the kind of historic nature of Lamar's numbers, and will just say hey, stats are stats, man. We've got to give it to him because he's had that type of campaign. I'm still kind of, I'm sure next week on Football 301, we're going to be doing MVPs. I'm still debating between the two, which one I want to give it to. I think it will be pretty close between those two guys. Ultimately, my guess is, though, that voter fatigue does win out and Josh Allen ends up getting his first. That would be my guess. But it is a pretty close race between those two. But you're right to point out just the contributions from everybody else here as well. Even if none of these guys like Flowers or even Bateman or Mark Andrews were fantasy league winners or anything like that, they all were very effective at different pockets of the season.
If Jackson doesn't win the MVP, you think of all the boxes he's going to, it's going to be one of those things where it's okay, nobody has ever led the league in touchdown rate, in yards per attempt, in quarterback rating, in QBR, and also ran for 852 yards and not won the MVP. I mean, it's just astounding the year that it's been his best season by far. And it's just crazy to think that somebody who already has 2 MVPs in his back pocket could get better, but he has gotten better. And, the MVP has just kind of become a crazy award. It has to be a quarterback now. That's why Barkley can't win it. Barkley shouldn't win it, but I wish it were most outstanding player so we could have more nuance. Cooper Kupp should have won it maybe 3 years ago. But I won't mind if Allen wins it. I would vote for Jackson if I had a vote, but I don't have a vote. But I just would like to see Jackson get the monkey off his back in the playoffs because it's become too cheap of a shot for people to take out. Oh, yeah, he's great for 4 months. Where are the January wins? And a lot of weird things happened when they played Kansas City in the AFC Championship game last year. Zay Flowers lost his mind on one play near the goal line, which kind of flipped the game. Yeah, I think Baltimore's getting over the hump. I can't see how Cleveland fights back here. No. We had some fun moments with Jerry Jeudy. Jameis Winston was a fun fantasy player for a while. He did some stuff for the Browns. He did some stuff for the opponents. We'll never get over that game Monday night against Denver, which was one of the highlights of the season. But DTR doesn't look like a professional quarterback. We may see Bailey Zappi in this game, who I think maybe have as a career as a backup. I liked him at moments with New England. I was kind of sorry to see him go because I think he could be a decent number 2 maybe, but he's not really a starter. Sounds like they're going to run it back with Watson. They've redone his contract. Nobody's looking forward to that. So good. Once again, the Cleveland Browns, they really haven't had a plan since they've rebooted the franchise. They've famously gone from quarterback to quarterback. And then this year, the most frustrating thing for them is seeing Baker Mayfield have a monster season on top of a comeback. Last year, a great comeback story, but this year Baker stacks it, has a better season. And the Browns were like, we used to have a quarterback who was pretty good, who was likable. Now we have quarterbacks who can't play, and the main guy isn't likable at all. So good luck, Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, no idea what the hell's going to happen to Cleveland in the offseason. But I can tell you in this game, I think they're going to get smoked. As you mentioned, the point spread is what it is. And I think the biggest reason, Scott, I like your take about how the Ravens, this could be the year the Ravens win the Super Bowl, is because at different points of the year, we thought, okay, like you said, this defense was one to attack, specifically in fantasy, like with wide receivers, especially guys that could work over the middle of the field. It's been an area it was a profitable thing, like play your passing game players against the Ravens, especially in the beginning of the season. It was a huge print fest basically for fantasy. And that was really in kind of, in contrast to what it was last year. That defense was one of the best in the league, and it felt like last year was Baltimore's window, right? Because they had Mike McDonald, they had some of those guys playing in their prime. Roquan Smith looks like he's maybe taking a step back this year, but ever since, and I've been talking about this a little bit, ever since they flipped Kyle Hamilton to safety, got rid of like Marcus Williams and Eddie Jackson, got those guys out of the mix. That has really changed things on the back end. And this team has actually just been not just one of, but the best defense from an EPA perspective in the back half of the season. So because of that, I definitely think Cleveland's getting smoked in this game. I don't even know how Pro Bowler Jerry Jeudy's gonna find yards in this one. That's going to be a tough one. Marlon Humphreys played well as the slot corner in the back half of the year. So Baltimore really looks like it's set up to surge. I would expect them to win this game, which brings us to the next game here. And, an interesting scenario, I think. Cincinnati Bengals at Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers, obviously, if Baltimore wins in the early window, they cannot clinch the AFC North. If Baltimore, for whatever reason, loses to the DTR-led Browns, then the Steelers just need to win this game, and they would lock up the AFC North and the number 3 seed. But again, I don't expect that to happen. So it becomes an interesting scenario. I don't see a universe, Scott, where Mike Tomlin isn't playing to win this game. I don't see that happening here. And so then most of the focus will be on the Bengals, who can clinch a playoff spot they have to win this game. Denver has to lose, and Miami has to lose or tie in their game later on. The big injury news here is that kind of revelatory running back Chase Brown is a game time decision, but otherwise both of these teams are relatively at full strength, and we should, I think, get a pretty normal matchup between these two guys.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Tomlin, look, we all think the Ravens are going to win the first game, and because there weren't as many juicy matchups as possible, the NFL needed to put some scheduling games on Saturday. They would have liked to have all these AFC North games played at the same time, but they needed something interesting to put into the Saturday programming. And because the Bengals have been such a fun team and the Steelers are a public team, we know that their fans travel well, they do well ratings wise. And Mike Tomlin does not want to go into the playoffs on a 4-game losing streak. I mean, this team has really collapsed lately. It's been an offensive problem, a defensive problem, to some degree an injury problem. So they need to feel good about themselves again. So they're going to show up. I'm not worried about that. And the Bengals, there are years when Phillip Rivers was still playing where the Chargers would like catch fire late in the season. They wouldn't make the playoffs. And we'd say, oh, if only the Chargers win the playoffs, they could beat anybody. They could put up 30 against anybody. That's who the Bengals are, right? They have been the preeminent. I know Detroit's made a late run with their defense collapsing, and they've been a carnival for maybe the last few weeks. But all season, it's been, okay, Joe Burrow, go outscore your defense and go put up 30 plus. And sometimes they put up 30 plus and lose, right? The game against Washington, the game against Baltimore, actually both Baltimore games were crazy. It's been the most bankable setup for fantasy. Joe Burrow having his best season. Again, if the award were most outstanding player, Burrow could receive support. He may get some down ballot MVP voting, but he won't get any first place votes. But maybe his best season. Jamar Chase making the pitch for the bag. It's a contract year for T. Higgins. He's been fantastic. I think by a per game basis, he's wide receiver 2. Mm-hmm. Chase has been wide receiver 1. That's pretty darn incredible. Good. Chase Brown has been one of the right answers. It's too bad he may not play in this game, but he's obviously somebody who you made a huge profit on and was on a bunch of fantasy championship winning teams. So bad defense, star quarterback, star talent in the offense in a very concentrated distribution. Every once in a while, Gesicki would make a play or Yoshivas would make a play, but it's really about those 3 amigos and Burrow playing. It's just so nice to see Burrow healthy. He's had such an injury-plagued career at times, and he's one of my favorite players. He won me over for life with that Heisman speech after he won the Heisman at LSU, and he's been to a Super Bowl. He's been one of the best players in the league. I still think he has an MVP season coming. It won't be this year, even though he pretty much did have an MVP-worthy season. Just other guys did on better teams. But this is kind of our chance to say goodbye to the Bengals. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs with the scenario you outlined, but they were fantasy royalty in 2024.
Yeah, 4 wide receivers averaged over 16 fantasy points per game. 2 of them are Cincinnati Bengals. It goes Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Justin Jefferson, Chris Godwin in terms of over 16 fantasy points per game at the wide receiver position. Special year from this group. And, I think I agree with you. I think it will be the time where we say goodbye to them this year. I think this will be it. It would be pretty embarrassing for the Broncos to lose to the Chiefs backups in week 18 because Kansas City definitely has no incentive to play in that game. They're not going to risk like Mahomes and any of the guys there. We're going to get a Carson Wentz start. And, there's probably a scenario where Carson Wentz can play well in this Chiefs offense. We'll touch on those games in just a second, but I do think that would be pretty embarrassing for Denver. And I don't think that Denver has been an embarrassing team this year. I actually think they've been a really well-coached, well-oiled machine over there. So I expect them to win this game. I expect this to be where we say goodbye to Cincinnati for the 2024 season. However, However, Scott, I really hope it's not when we say goodbye to this trio. You mentioned it, Burrow, Higgins, and Chase all together. I still think it probably is, although there's a chance like the Bengals could just franchise T. Higgins and say, hey, we'll figure it out one more time. Like, we'll figure it out one more time, which I think would really piss off T. Higgins and piss off probably Joe Burrow. That's the thing that I don't think people are discussing enough about this situation, Scott, where, yeah, it's going to be really tough for the way the Bengals do business. Like, most of the other teams in the league, like, look at what Philadelphia did. Look at what Miami's doing right now. They've paid all their quarterback and their top 2 receivers. It's not like Cincinnati's paying a bunch of players on defense. The defense stinks. That's part of the reason that they're in this particular situation where they're going to miss the playoffs. But almost any other team could figure this out financially. And I feel like if the Bengals just decide to not do it and T. Higgins walks, and by the way, T. Higgins could walk and make, I think he could end up being the highest paid receiver in the league by the Patriots or some team like that. Who knows? But you run the risk of really pissing off the most important person in your building, which is Joe Burrow. And I would not want to do that if I was Bengals management.
Right. And knowing Burrow the way he is, he's going to be in the front office's ear and certainly pitch for his guy Chase and certainly pitch for keeping Higgins. And we know that offense has more continuity year over year than defense. So why not steer into this? Run it all back, man. I would just pitch it all to like, look, we could have been a Super Bowl threat if we made the playoffs. They're probably not going to make it with the situation you outlined. Let's run it all back and be the best. Let's be the Lions next year. Let's score 500 plus points and blow everybody off the map. They could do it. And with Higgins, I don't begrudge anybody trying to get the biggest bag they can and taking care of their family and generational wealth and your grandchildren and all that. I mean, everybody has to decide what's best for them. But is it better for T. Higgins to maybe, and look, the Bengals are notoriously cheap with these situations. And I'm pro player. They have such short windows to earn money that I hope he can get the best deal he can. But he knows he's a superstar. And I know he has to be the 1B to chase his 1A, but he still hit a monster season. Again, he was wide receiver 2 in per game stats this year. The numbers were there. There are a lot of games he was targeted more than Jamar Chase. So is it better for him to stay with a star quarterback that you already click with, a very narrow concentration offense, or to go somewhere? Look, I'm in love with Drake May, but I mean, would T. Higgins have the same stats with a second-year Drake May as opposed to a prime of career Joe Burrow? Maybe just one more year and run it back for a year and then figure it out next year. I'd love to see that selfishly. Again, I can't tell T. Higgins what to do. I don't begrudge him if he goes to a situation where the money is better. Maybe he wants to be the unquestioned number 1 in his room, which he would be almost anywhere he would sign, you would think. But selfishly, I hope they run it back next year because I've had a blast watching this team. And we always talk about variance in football. There's been no variance with this offense. Every week, these guys put up the stats. And that's such a rarity in our game that I have to celebrate when a team comes along like this.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's tough for T. Higgins. I think the franchise tag is the only thing that I feel like if they do it, they have to actually get a deal done fast with him. Mm-hmm. It's that's the tough part here. Because again, he's the guy that needs to get on a long-term deal because the one thing you have to say with him is that he does get injured all the time. And like the next injury could be one that if it happened on a franchise tag, you just never know what's going to happen. So that's obviously the big offseason storyline for them. For this particular game, you mentioned it that it's not just an offensive problem for Pittsburgh right now. Down the stretch, their defense has been an issue too. Since week 10, both of these defenses obviously the Bengals have been bad all year. They're 27th in success rate since week 10. The Steelers aren't that much better. They're 24th. There's all those quotes coming out of the Christmas Day game where people like TJ Watt saying, hey, when 10 guys do their job and one guy doesn't, the whole unit fails. I'm paraphrasing there, but that was basically the nature of the quote. There are issues on the coverage perspective, like Minkah Fitzpatrick, big name, but he's been freelancing a lot. That's given up some of these big plays. And shoot, I could definitely see this game being very high scoring because of the way these two defenses are. Obviously a 48-point total on BetMGM. I could certainly see Cincinnati pushing that to 30 points all in its own. And then I do think the Steelers offense, when they go up against soft defenses like this, I do think that George Pickens and Jaylen Warren, who's gotten more and more work as the season's gone on and looked better and better, I think those guys alone can help move this thing to like a 30-20 type of game.
Well, remember, they played a month ago, December 1st. It was 44-38 Steelers, right? So we've at least seen that range of outcome. The key, I think, for Pittsburgh, they need to get Pickens going. I mean, he was having a really nice season. He got hurt He's not been effective since then. He's just the one separator in this offense. I mean, they have a bunch of role guys. They have not really found a second pitch in their passing game. Jaylen Warren has probably been the more efficient back than Najee Harris in recent weeks. Wilson, I think we've seen the Wilson limitations kind of come back. They're managing him pretty well for a while, but I think especially when Pickens doesn't play. I mean, Wilson just looks like he doesn't know what to do out there, and it's been frustrating. The Steelers, all these games on national TV too, right? We see them on Christmas Day. We see them usually in that late window where they're one of the signature games. I mean, Pittsburgh is a team you see every snap every week, and it's been hard to watch this offense. So I hope that Pickens can kind of spread his wings. The Bengals secondary should be a good group for him to match up against because he's obviously the one difference maker in their passing game. I don't even know who the number 2 guy is. I mean, Freiermuth is okay as an interior player, but he's not an explosive player. They don't really have anybody else who gets downfield. Occasionally, Austin will make a play or something like that. Mike Williams has been slow to adjust, which is like the story of his career the last few seasons. But they really need Pickens. For them to win, I think Pickens has to have 80-plus yards in this game.
Yeah, I like that call out. And definitely if you're looking for props or anything, the fact that, Jaylen Warren, 20 and a half over under on the receiving yards for him.
Oh, yeah. Smash.
He's number 2 among running backs since week 13 in team target share behind only Devon Achane. He's been a big time player for that passing game, and he's also been pretty explosive as a runner. 46% of his carries have gone for 5+ yards. He's just definitely been an answer for them. But yeah, you're not wrong. Like last time they had that big explosive game against Cincinnati, that was the last game that George Pickens played. So and he's coming off a weird game last week against Kansas City where he wasn't finishing his routes again and some of that stuff it's been a weird season for Pickens. It's been very effective when he's been on, but hoping that he can have a big game in this one.
I love that Warren call out because I think that prop reflects how these props often get done based on the body of work of the player the full season, and it overlooks that Warren has beaten that number 4 out of 5 weeks. He's had 41 and 44 receiving yards the last 2 games, and the last time he played the Bengals, he had 55 receiving yards. So all the recent trends point to Warren easily, and that number is going to go up. If you want that, get it as soon as possible. Anytime you want a prop on the plus side, you want to get it early. If you're going to fade something, usually you take it later. But I think that prop reflects the book looking at the full season and maybe not focusing on the shift of the offense going to Warren-centric stuff in recent weeks.
All right, let's move to the NFC South watch portion of this. Really, mostly, we're looking at New Orleans at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay clinches the NFC South title and the number 4 seed with a win here, or if Atlanta loses or ties against Carolina. We can briefly talk about the Falcons and Panthers, but let's mostly focus on the Saints here. A lot going on. Mike Evans' 1,000-yard streak is within reach. Baker Mayfield wants to hit that. Baker Mayfield, by the way, he's probably going to have 40+ touchdowns on the season, which is absolutely outrageous considering, if you look at the players in NFL history who have 40+ touchdowns, in a season, it's just a bunch of inner circle players, and then Baker Mayfield, who leads the NFL in touchdown passes over the last 2 years combined.
Yeah, I mean, last year when I would say positive things about Baker Mayfield, I was always afraid of them maybe biting me. I wasn't sure when the other shoe was going to drop. And finally, I've accepted this year that Baker Mayfield has just rebuilt his career. And I was even worried about Dave Canales leaving. And I think maybe Cohen is a better offensive coordinator, right? I mean,
yeah.
And to Baker's credit, he's maintained the production. Evans missed time. Obviously, Chris Godwin has missed a decent chunk of the season. They've gotten Jalen McMillan going. He's got 6 touchdowns in his last 4 games. They have 2. I think Rachaad White is a good player. I think Bucky Irving is a great player. They've even had moments with Tucker has sprinkled in a little bit. I just love watching Baker Mayfield. He's competitive. He's a leader of men. He's somebody who, just connects with everybody in his huddle. He'll throw some to the other guys. He's not a perfect player, but man, Pro Bowl snub, by the way. I know the Pro Bowl nominations mean different things to different people. To me, it's always when people are evaluating players and ranking guys, I always find that interesting. Nobody really cares about the charade of the weekend and everything, but how players are ranked, it's interesting to us. But it's just fun to see Baker Mayfield being Baker Mayfield again. It wasn't that long ago that he was kind of one of the glamour boys of the league. He was on every commercial after that one breakout season in Cleveland, and he took them, the Browns, to a playoffs where they won. They beat Pittsburgh. their big brother who basically dominates them. Ben Roethlisberger had the most wins in Cleveland Stadium of any quarterback and all that stuff. They beat Pittsburgh on Baker's watch, and they went to Kansas City and put a scare into the Chiefs. That was a great moment for the Browns. It feels like 100 years ago. And then Baker was on every commercial. He got hurt. Labrum, they decided he couldn't play anymore. They made a bunch of bad decisions that we've already talked about, and nobody needs to be rehashed any further. I just, to me, Matt, Baker Mayfield, every week when I decide what games I want to rewatch on Monday, I want treat myself a little bit, right? I don't put on the Raiders to start, though Brock Bowers had a great season, but I don't put on the Patriots tape, even though Drake May has shown some optimism. The Cardinals, to watch Kyler Murray not throw touchdowns at Trey McBride. I put on the Buccaneers. I put on the Bengals. I put on the Lions. I want to treat myself. This is one of the offenses that I've enjoyed so much watching, and it's a variety of different guys. It's running, it's passing, it's young players, it's veteran players. But as we know, the connectivity of every offense is the quarterback. And, Baker Mayfield is once again a star in the NFL. I think it's a glorious day.
Yeah, and that's why I've said that they cannot let Liam Cohen out of that building, because like you're right. You got lucky last year. Not lucky, obviously. Finding Cohen's a good evaluation of coaching, and there was some connective tissue between because him and Baker Mayfield spent some time together in LA. But you got it right after losing one of the young up and comers in Dave Canales, who I think is a good coach. I think has done well with the Carolina Panthers, but Cohen has definitely been better this year with him as the offensive coordinator there. It's well designed, and Baker's pushing all the right buttons. He feels very in tune and in sync with what this offense wants him to do. And you're right that there's a contribution from so many players here, all of whom I think could be in good spots here in Week 18 against a Saints defense that's not good. Let's not even forget like the Cade Otton era. Like, we lose Chris Godwin, we lose all our wide receivers. We're going to make Cade Otton the focal point of the offense, which was just one pocket of the season. It wasn't an entire thing. It was one little chapter, right? But that's good coordinating. That's and when you're a quarterback who can execute that, that's a credit to you too. So this has been, I've not shied away from it. This has been one of my favorite offenses to watch all year. Not one of my favorite defenses to watch, by the way. Not that I think there's anybody in New Orleans at this point that could take advantage of that, but this should be a moment where Tampa Bay can get past a Saints team that, has felt pretty lifeless and listless for a while.
Remember that first 2 weeks of the season where
I remember
the Saints, they I wrote all these nice things about Carolina, and the Saints crushed them in week 1. And they went to Dallas, and it's kind of sometimes hard to get a sense of what Dallas is. Sorry, producer Colin. But they go to Dallas, beat the living snot out of them. And I just basically wrote apologies to, I underestimated Kubiak. I underestimated Alvin Kamara. I underestimated Derek Carr. And then since then, a lot of things went wrong. The offensive line collapsed. A bunch of players got hurt. Obviously, the coaching staff got fired, or a lot of the guys, Dennis Allen, the head coach, who I don't think anybody was all that much in love with. He lost his job. There's a long losing streak. They ended up hitting their under on win total, 2 or 3 weeks before the season ended. I mean, just everything collapsed here. And now what's left, right? Even Kendry Miller finally got a chance to play. He got hurt. Chris Olave, the concussion. Shaheed was having a breakout season. It feels like his injury was 100 years ago, but he was really flashing. Then his season gets wiped out. So they haven't run well. A lot of things have gone wrong. I mean, think about it. Their quarterback gets hurt. Their top 2 receivers get hurt. Kamara, we know, is going to miss games. He's an attrition guy, but the offensive line cluster injuries there. So it's not a surprise that they've collapsed. And then the defense, that compete level in that Green Bay game was so low. But I would think that this has blowout potential. I don't know if the Saints score more than 10 points in this game, even against the Buccaneers defense. We don't think that much about. I just hope next year Shaheed can get in a full season. Chris Olave is a good football player, man. It's not his fault, the run out of the way things have gone for him. This year, it's a concussion problem. Other years, it's been things that I don't blame him for. We finally saw Terry McLaurin get the right infrastructure for him to have a breakout season. Where I don't know why is it always these Ohio State guys, right? We're all waiting for Garrett Wilson to get the right run out. He didn't get it this year with Rodgers playing so poorly, and then Adams comes over and he becomes the apple of Rodgers' eye, and Wilson has to accept a secondary role. Garrett Wilson's a great football player. Chris Olave, obviously a great football player. I just hope next year those guys get a chance to show what they can do, because I don't have much like McLaurin. I never blame Terry McLaurin when he would have mildly disappointing seasons, and I don't blame those other OSU guys either.
You're right. And circumstances have definitely not lended in their favors. Whereas on the other side, like the other wide receiver, and like they're clearly ahead at this point, LSU. Those guys are great players. They have definitely fallen into some spots where they can dominate the target trees, although some questionable quarterback play, certainly for a guy like Malik Neighbors. Real quick before we toss to break, just the other side of this here is obviously the Carolina at Atlanta matchup. Any thoughts on the Falcons in this game, as obviously this is going to be Michael Penix's third start?
There's just that one moment. Obviously, they mismanaged the clock in Washington. They could have won that game. But what I'm gonna come back to is that throw that Penix made to Kyle Pitts, where there was like at the tightest of windows, and it ties the game. And it's like Kirk Cousins can't make that throw.
Yep. And
I'm just so excited. We've seen the last couple of weeks. I know Charles McDonald has done a lot of writing about this, and some really good review of how Penix has looked. They're just this offense now has plays that didn't exist under Kirk Cousins, right? Things they could not do with Kirk Cousins because of preferences, because of body type, because of physical limitations. And we don't know if Penix is going to be a great pro or not. He's hardly played yet, but just the upside of the unknown with him. He's obviously a dynamic player in college. And I'm just excited to see they have a playbook now, because they had like a pamphlet of plays they could run. And now they have like a legitimate playbook they can run. And maybe it won't show this week. They probably won't make the playoffs, but I'm really excited to see what can be unveiled next year. And nobody really understood what they did with, you have to pick a lane. You either sign Cousins and you're all in there, or you draft Penix, you're all in there. And they played it both ways. It doesn't really make sense, but at least it would have been easy just to ride it out with Cousins this year. At least they finally made the change. And there's hope that we can maybe hit the ceiling of Drake London, that he's always been just a little bit disappointing. We know Kyle Pitts the last few years has not been a guy that we could count on. Darnell Mooney did have a good season this year. Robinson was really good. I'm just hoping next year, maybe Zach Robinson's second year as the OC, maybe he'll be more ready for the play calling, and maybe there's a feet getting wet situation with him too as well. I still think the arrow is pointing up for the Falcons.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's a good way of putting it, that it's nice that they have broken from the past and are now just squarely in the future. Because I'm with you. I don't think they end up making the playoffs. Honestly, I think the Bucs deserve the playoff spot more than the Atlanta Falcons, even if they shouldn't have lost two. They shouldn't have lost two games to this Falcons team, and they certainly shouldn't have lost that game in Dallas, which was the moment I was most disappointed with this team that I've really enjoyed watching all year. But a lot of that comes down to the defense, and that's going to be a tough conversation in the offseason. But
for some reason, Kirk Cousins owned the Falcons. I mean, he's only two games of note this year. He went ballistic against the Tampa Bay. He owned the Buccaneers. He just couldn't do it against anybody else.
Oh yeah, well we don't have to do the whole thing here again, but I've talked about it a lot, where they're like the perfect defense for Kirk to just absolutely smash. Not a lot of pressure, all that zone coverage, easy to see where the blitzes are coming from if you're a veteran quarterback. So that was just uniquely the Falcons signed Kirk Cousins just for those two games against Tampa. And then all right, now it's Penix time. But that's mostly what this Week 18 will be about, continuing to scout that Michael Penix, Drake London connection. The couple of those outbreaking routes are just beautiful from him. Penix definitely has some accuracy concerns. He can spray it. He can miss a few throws, some of those outbreakers as well. But that'll be interesting against this Panthers defense that's not very good. But I do think this will be the time we say goodbye to the Atlanta Falcons. We're not going to say goodbye. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to break down the biggest game on the Week 18 schedule right after this. All right, we're back. Scott, let's talk through the biggest game on the Week 18 schedule here. Vikings at Lions. I mean, what a time to be alive. We're talking about the Sam Darnold-led Minnesota Vikings going into Detroit to battle for the NFC's number 1 seed. A tie, by the way, does go to Detroit, obviously, if that is what happens here. But hopefully we just get a good, clean win. We don't get any of that. I don't see Dan Campbell ever playing for a tie. I don't think we have.
I was just going to say the same thing. Even if they won with a tie, he'd be like, no, we want the win. We don't want to back into it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there was that playoff game several years ago where the Raiders and the Chargers were playing for it in the final week of the season, and the Raiders were kind of angling for a tie. I think Sean Payton might have been angling for a tie, in that Bengals game last week. I don't think we got to worry about that with Dan Campbell. He will be going for the win no matter what. He will not be trying to play for a tie for the NFC's number 1 seed. But let's break this game down. Let's give it its due here. Let's talk Vikings when they have the ball. Scott, I'm just curious what you've seen from this team, what you're expecting to see from this team here in Week 18 in a matchup that, again, the entire nation will be watching. What's been one of the most fun offenses in the NFL, period, full stop.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell is probably already won Coach of the Year with a year with plenty of candidates, including Campbell. But Minnesota's their over under was like 5.5, 6.5, something like that. People basically gave them up for dead when McCarthy got hurt, and can Darnold even just be a quasi competent quarterback in his breakthrough season? Now, what do? Right? Do they try to trade McCarthy? Do they just try to run this back for a little bit and buy some time? I don't think they can look away from Darnold. Has been so good, man. So I mean, every week it's ratings over 100. He pushed the ball downfield. And what's really impressed me is that even though Justin Jefferson is one of the best receivers in football, probably the first or second best receiver, depending on how you break the tie with him and Chase. I know a healthy CeeDee Lamb would be right up there. But if you try to, we've seen some teams say, okay, we're going to do everything we can to take away Jefferson. Then fine. Jordan Addison will kill you. Fine. We'll throw to Hawkinson. We can run the ball too. You can see, I also think of that throw that Darnold made against Seattle. He made a couple of throws that fit this description where the pocket became a little muddied. He climbed in the pocket, threw a little bit off platform, and just threw a laser because he has so much arm talent. And one of my favorite stats I love to bring up, because this is never changing, Matt, is Sam Darnold's younger than Joe Burrow. He came to the league. Things are different now with NIL and all the transfer portal and everything. People stay in college longer. It used to be if you're any good, you got out of college really quickly and you got to the NFL. And the run out for Darnold was so unlucky. You got mono with the Jets of all things. Everything went wrong there. He landed in Carolina at a time when that was a totally untenable situation. Sam Darnold's a great player, man. I'm so excited to see it. O'Connell is a perfect coach for him. He's got the ideal setup. Jefferson, the alpha. Addison, a very, very good number two. Jordan Addison's been terrific this year and one of my favorite players to watch. Hawkinson does what he does. Maybe not explosive, but reliable. He occupies a certain part of the field. I just love how O'Connell's always calm, too. Even O'Connell, reassuring Anthony Richardson after they played them, is like, hey, you're going to have a long career in this league. Head up. I still believe in you. I know everybody in your locker room believes in you, all that stuff. Even if that's not true, I'm ready to follow Kevin O'Connell into a burning building. It just breaks my heart, man. I love both these teams. They should both have home games. I don't see why the NFL couldn't change the rule. Look, you win your division, you make the playoffs, but you don't get guaranteed a home game. It seems pretty obvious to me because I would love to see the Detroit Lions or Minnesota Vikings in the Super Bowl. They're both worthy, and somebody's going to win the division, be the 1 seed. Somebody's going to lose and be the 5 seed. It just doesn't seem fair to me.
Alas, it is what it is, because that's what's going to happen, man. And it's crazy because these are two of the best teams in the league. It would be wild after obviously Minnesota is the apple of everybody's eye right now. But it would be wild if after the season the Detroit Lions had they're not gonna be the number 1 seed in the NFC. They're not gonna have a home playoff game. That would blow my mind. But if that's what happened, I mean, shoot, it would make sense just because they could lose this matchup against the Vikings because that's how good that team is playing right now. But again, that does seem it seems crazy to me just based on how well the Lions have played. And they were my Super Bowl pick heading into the year. I think they've played mostly they've weathered attrition. They've weathered injuries. That's that is the whole thing of their season this year is just what they've been able to overcome.
They have also won all their road games too. So Campbell will sell it on. Yeah. We can win anywhere. It just breaks your heart what's happened to the defense. It started with a Hutchinson injury, but it's spiraled to they've lost playmakers in all 3 levels. And this went from a defense that was a top 5 unit in the league to it's a bottom 5 unit in the league now. And now they're playing that Cincinnati football where they have to outscore everybody. That game against the 49ers on Monday night was very much the type of football they have to play. The game they had against Buffalo where they were outscored. You score 42 points and lose. They outscored the Packers the previous week. Chicago didn't put much of a fight in the second game. They could have easily lost that first Chicago game if Eberflus didn't lose his mind on Thanksgiving Day. So it's just, I think if they had a regular run out of health on defense, they'd be the overwhelming Super Bowl favorites. Now I feel like this is a coin flip game. No outcome would surprise me. And I'm just afraid. I think Detroit to get to the Super Bowl, I give them the chance to beat anybody, but I think for them to get to the Super Bowl, they really need that home game and the one less game to play because at some point this defense is going to let them down and it's going to be like, okay, Goff, you need to score 40 today to beat somebody. They could obviously lose to Minnesota in the playoffs. They could lose to Tampa Bay in the playoffs. They could lose to Philly in the playoffs. I would give Tampa Bay or the Rams, two teams. Tampa Bay beat them earlier in the season. The Rams, they went to overtime week 1 of the regular season. I don't know what those games mean now because they were so long ago, but I think Detroit needs that easier path to get to I don't think they're going to go if they're going to be the road team. It sounds easy to say that, but I just feel like a defense that has this many holes, you just don't want the liability of having to play 3 games.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense because it's a defense that obviously has regressed statistically, eye test wise, whatever, in the face of all these injuries. But I'd also argue that Aaron Glenn has done a really good job keeping the train on the tracks. Like, it's not an embarrassing defense. It's just, hey, sometimes you're going to get got because you've got backups on backups out there, you know? But at the same time, still have Brian Branch, who's a playmaker. Kirby Joseph still back there at safety. He got Brock Purdy twice on that Monday night game against the 49ers. So they still have some moments there, well-designed stuff on defense. When the Vikings, this great offense, go against this Lions defense, it is worth noting that, again, credit to Aaron Glenn, he has not changed the stripes of this tiger at all. Well, I mean, it's a lion, but, you know, bad analogy there. This cat has not changed its stripes at all on defense there because they still play a ton of man coverage. Even with the backups in there, they play a ton of man coverage. And the Vikings don't get a lot of man coverage usually because they have Justin Jefferson, and you know, you're definitely going to cloud his side, which has led, you know, just some beautiful moments for Jordan Addison, just slicing open zone coverage. But since I've talked about this a lot, since week 12, this is still true. It's only 28 dropbacks for Sam Darnold. Like I said, not a huge sample size, but on those dropbacks, TJ Hawkinson leads the team in yards per route run against man coverage since week 12, and all these guys have been healthy. 5.24 yards per route run against man. Jordan Addison is number 2 at 1.59. Justin Jefferson 0.75. So that's most, like I said, there's some small sample size there because the Vikings don't get a lot of man coverage because of the weapons that they have. However, this is still a man coverage defense, and I would expect TJ Hawkinson to get a lot of passes in this game. His over-under for catches is 4.5 at plus odds. I kind of like that one there.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds like a 6 or 7 game, a catch game for Hawkinson. I'm so glad you said everything you said about Aaron Glenn, too, because it's not his fault. The defense has collapsed, and this is another big reason why the window is now for Detroit, because you would think Ben Johnson's going to get a head coaching job and Aaron Glenn's going to get interviewed, justly so. One of the big wins for them was running everything back, including keeping Johnson, keeping Glenn into this 2024 season. And just when you have guys this talented and this respected around the league, you're just not going to keep them. At some point, somebody's going to offer them a head coaching job. I would think Johnson would have his choice of jobs. And again, Glenn will be interviewed. So this is the moment is now for Detroit. And I hope they can take advantage of it. But by the same token, it's the Vikings are a great story too. And just to see Darnold reminds us, we talked about Baker Mayfield earlier. And my friend and podcast mate, Michael Salfino, talks about this a lot. He's talked to Bill Parcells where he says, player failures a lot of times are organizational. Yes. And it's not about the player himself. And, with Mayfield, maybe he needed to get out of Cleveland, certainly get out of Carolina. Maybe Darnold just needed to finally land in a positive infrastructure and ecosystem and land with the right coach, land with the right talent around him. And it's just exciting. Even Goff, right? I mean, when he was traded to, from the Rams, the Rams basically said, we can't go any further with him. We have to go somewhere else. They won the championship with Stafford, of course. But Goff was at one point, he thought maybe he was going to get benched, right? I mean, he was seen as a placeholder until they find their next quarterback.
Scott, people were mocking like which hilarious in hindsight, but like Malik Willis to the Lions in the first round because, at some point they've got to replace Jared Goff.
Right. Yeah. Well, they Hendon Hooker, when he gets healthy, he's going to step in for Goff, stuff like that. It's just, Goff, it's gotten to the point now where I live in the Metro Detroit area. I was at a hockey game and random Jared Goff chants come out at a hockey game. That also speaks to the fact that the Red Wings are not having a great season. They fired their coach about a week ago, but that's beside the point. Jared Goff is like the mayor of Detroit now, and it's so great. Everywhere you drive, there's a Sam Laporta billboard here. There's a St. Brown billboard there. There's Goff stuff everywhere. There's Dan Campbell stuff everywhere. It's just this city has been Detroit. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, there's all this corruption in the politics here, and the city was bankrupt, and it was just easy for people like Jay Leno to make fun of Detroit. And it's just so nice to see a renaissance. The Pistons are actually playing better now. The Tigers just went to the playoffs, had an unbelievable final quarter of the season in baseball, and the Lions have been for the majority of the season the best team in football. And it's just, people are nicer. People, there's a pride, there's a bounce in the step of Detroit that they haven't had for a long time. And it's been really fun to live through that.
Okay, number one, I am absolutely judging all like universal approval or disapproval ratings based on chance at hockey games.
There you go.
Because I think Jared Goff has a 100% approval rating in Detroit right now based on that information. And remember when Steelers fans were chanting at Pittsburgh Penguin hockey games to fire Matt Canada? Like that was the other universal, nobody approves of the job that this guy is doing. So that's our new barometer for like 100% approval, disapproval ratings in the NFL. Jared Goff has a 100% approval rating for the Detroit Lions. And Scott, is that not like the lesson of the 2024 season? We're talking about freaking Baker Mayfield. We're talking about Sam Darnold. We're talking about Jared Goff. All these like second chance, maybe more than second chance for some of these guys, but Goff at least it definitely is second chance. I called reclamation project quarterbacks. This is what I said on Twitter. Is like we're talking about the Vikings and Lions here for the NFC number 1 seed. 2 reclamation project quarterbacks. I think it should teach us a couple of things. One, don't be too quick to judge these guys throughout the course of their career. Like you said, quarterbacks are more often failed than they do fail. Some of the, obviously a guy like Caleb Williams, hopefully they can do something they can figure that out with his current team before it gets to this point. And secondly, it should also just teach us to kind of like, there are more than one ways to find a quarterback, and if you've got the right ecosystem around him, I think there's a great ecosystem with these two teams. Certainly Tampa Bay has somehow found its way into a great ecosystem on the second play caller with Baker Mayfield. There's more than one way to do it from a quarterback perspective. Last thing here on this game before we, anything else you got on this game, I'm down to talk through. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Jahmyr Gibbs. Where does Jahmyr Gibbs rank in like NFL running back terms? Obviously, we have some great veterans still producing at the highest level. I've probably just been really attuned to Jahmyr Gibbs this season because I had a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs in fantasy. All of my teams that made it to the championship, won a championship, at least got close to a damn championship, were Jahmyr Gibbs teams. So I've been very in tune with how he's played this year. I think he's been so awesome from just like a watching him perspective. I find him to be a joy to watch. He's like the 99th percentile of what a guy like that could be coming to the league. I saw Michael Florio from the NFL Network, NFL Fantasies, Michael Florio, not the other Mike Florio, tweet, Jahmyr Gibbs surpassed Bijan Robinson to finish as the running back 2 on the year in fantasy. Through 2 seasons, they're separated by less than 3 PPR points in their careers. And I don't really think it's talked about that way. I don't really think Jahmyr Gibbs gets mentioned as one of the best backs in the league. I think it's past time that he does. And I think this little mini stint without David Montgomery has really been a proof of that.
I mean, just one of my most favorite backs to watch. The quickness, the way he's utilized by Johnson. He's so dynamic as a receiver. The wheel routes, he's devastating. But also, he can run inside. Jalen Hurts had 11 1-yard. I'm just doing a thing for the newsletter. We have some awards coming out that Andy Behrens and I wrote that will pop in your mailbox on Friday. And I talked about Jalen Hurts having 11 1-yard touchdowns. Just crazy, right? I mean, imagine the season Barkley could have had if he had any of those touchdowns. There are a handful of players who had 6 rushing touchdowns from 1 yard out. And one of them was Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think we both thought, oh no, that's going to be Montgomery, right? That's going to be a mistake. Oh, by the way, Roshan Johnson was one of those guys. I dare anybody you want to drink for free all night, ask that trivia question, see when they come to Roshan Johnson. But Gibbs, this whole idea that, remember when Montgomery was healthy, it was more of a Montgomery series, Gibbs series. It wasn't like Montgomery was only the pounder and Gibbs was only the splashy outside the tackle guy. Gibbs can run inside. And a lot of times success in those plays is quickness, is hitting the hole, is getting what's blocked, and then maybe getting that burst to the second level. I'm a David Montgomery guy. I'm always going to be a David Montgomery guy. And he's obviously one of the spirit animals of that team. But Gibbs is the more explosive. He's younger in his career, of course, but Gibbs is the guy who just puts more of a bounce in your step. And I wish we had both guys right now. I say we because I've kind of adopted this team. So, I'm part of the team now. I'm part of the success or part of the failure. But yeah, Gibbs, again, you want to reward yourself every Monday. What do I want to watch? I want to watch some Jahmyr Gibbs, man, because you see plays where you're like, oh yeah, this is like a 5-yard run. It's like, no, it's a 27-yard run.
That's the best way to say it. Where like if you freeze frame it when he's about to hit the line of scrimmage, I'm like, it's a nice little run, and then I'm like, oh my god, I'm about to get that notification, from my fantasy app that, that's a 20+ yard run for
He
Jahmyr
breaks your
Gibbs.
phone. You are constantly getting Jahmyr
yeah.
Gibbs updates. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. My screen time is way up this year by having, and I didn't go out and say I got to get Jahmyr Gibbs on teams this year. He just happened to be the running back that I had ranked 4 or 5, something like that. And I just ended up taking him a lot because people were very wide receiver heavy this year and I had picks around the turn. I ended up with a lot of him and my phone data or whatever suffered. My screen time went up because Jahmyr Gibbs was racking up all those notifications for sure. One more note on the Detroit Lions. This is a matchup note from Next Gen Stats, NFL Pro. The Vikings defense blitzed Jared Goff on 55.2% of his dropbacks in Week 7. It was the highest blitz rate that he faced in a game this season. Goff targeted Amon-Ra St. Brown on half of his routes, 7 of 14 against the blitz, completing all 7 for 105 and a touchdown. No props up for him at this point, I think just because maybe he's on the injury list, something like that. But, man, he is once again set up to smash this season.
Amon-Ra St. Brown I spent a day looking at old high school recruiting rankings, and I forgot this. Amon-Ra St. Brown was the number 2, and I realized, look, trying to evaluate and rank 17 and 18-year-olds is like a fool's errand. There's just you don't know the level of competition sometimes, what these players are going to do in college, how mature they are, what they'll ultimately be when they fill out their bodies, all that stuff. It's tons of just unknowable stuff. Justin Jefferson was not a top 200 receiver prospect in his class, which just sounds crazy. But Amon-Ra St. Brown was the number 2 receiver class in in that recruiting class. Okay, Chase was number 4, by the way. And the only reason St. Brown went in the 4th round is he was hurt his final year at USC. He was actually really productive the previous year, and then he missed half the time. And I'm just kicking myself that I've had tons of St. Brown in recent years, but I feel like that rookie season was gettable at the draft, right? I mean, he's somebody probably people picked up, or maybe he was a last round pick or something like that. But I feel like a lot of times I want to look back at what was for example, Brian Thomas had a higher prospect pedigree than Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors. I'm not saying that he's better than those guys. We'll see what happens, obviously.
You can, and by the way, Scott, you can also victory lap being one of the very few people in the fantasy industry. I'll give you credit on this. Even if it's sometimes like we talked about behind closed doors, you're like, we're really just gonna draft Marvin Harrison in like the 2nd round of drafts, and I was kind of like, Scott, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't go too hard on that take because he's a very, very good prospect. You were 100% right about that. So even this leads into the fact that I think Brian Thomas has definitely looked like a better prospect on the NFL field than Marvin Harrison Jr. at least, and Malik Neighbors I think too at times as well. I
appreciate you saying that. The thing about Thomas is how much was left on the field, right? I mean, it's not like Trevor Lawrence played well. It's not like Mac Jones, although he did the touchdown last week was really crisp, but
it's not like it's a good offensive coaching staff that we have a lot of faith with.
Yeah, imagine Brian Thomas was playing, with Kevin O'Connell and Sam Darnold, or with Goff and Ben Johnson, or with a plus quarterback. He was part of the Lamar show or the Josh Allen show, and it's so weird that Josh Allen's going to have an MVP season and none of his receivers are really coming along for the ride. You got mileage out of Khalil Shakir, but everybody else has pretty much been a disappointment there. Which just strange in the NFL. Just so strange at Mahomes, right? Just wasn't really a fantasy right answer. He had really good games the last couple of weeks of the season, but he goes down as a disappointment. But Brian Thomas is always open. They don't always make the throw. Finally, late in the season, I know you talked about this some, and Dalton was talking about this some. They finally said, you know what? This guy needs to be targeted 10 to 12, 14 times off the bus. We saw Neighbors got that type of activity. The season that Neighbors had with no quarterback support, where it was Daniel Jones, who wasn't good, and then a series of guys who were worse. I realized Drew Lock played well the final game of the season, but what a motley crew of quarterbacks they had. I cannot wait to say, next year, man, next summer, Matt, think of the debates we're going to have. Brian Thomas versus Malik Neighbors tied to hopefully a new quarterback. That's just what a great time to be alive. The 2nd year receiver group. I mean, McConkey had a great year, and just so many guys. We saw McMillan going crazy with the touchdowns. Harrison is still obviously a very talented player. And of course, who did the Patriots get with all these great receivers? Jalen Polk.
Oh God, and man, the Jalen Polk stuff makes me so sad. What a rough year that he's had. But before we throw to break, I just want to close the loop on the St. Brown thing. He's a great example of, like, sometimes rookies, it takes a minute for their teams to figure them out, and good teams will figure it out. But like, I will never forget in the rookie report that year for St. Brown, charting like, why is he running a bunch of routes from the outside? And we're talking like he's running a bunch of 9 routes. That's not the way to use him, because I actually really liked St. Brown as a prospect. I had him ranked as like a early day 2 type guy. He went in the 4th round, so shout out to me. But he was somebody that so clearly should have been a big slot. And finally, I think when Anthony Lynn gets pushed out the door, Ben Johnson takes on more responsibilities. He starts getting used as that power slot player. The rest is history. He's one of the most productive receivers in the league since he's started getting those chances.
I got to mention one other thing about Detroit. The extra pinch, just that one extra thing in the meal, a little extra garnish you needed. He's not their best player, but they've finally gotten Jameson Williams healthy and engaged. And I realize Williams can be a frustrating player at times because he'll make a mental mistake, or you'll pick up a taunting penalty, or run the wrong route or something. But
he'll get suspended.
Yes, he'll get suspended
for multiple things.
Takes the top off of defense, though, man. He scares the crap out of teams. Ben Johnson is so good at cooking up downfield plays for him. And as much as I love St. Brown, as much as I love Sam Laporta, as much as I love the backs here, especially when both of them are healthy, to have that one guy who the defense is like, oh crap, this guy could score a 75-yard touchdown at any play. To have that guy, and that Jameson Williams is that guy, takes an offense from being, oh yeah, it's one of the top 5 offenses in the league, to no, it's the best offense in football right now.
That's a perfect way of saying it. This offense, as awesome as it was in the previous iterations, it needed like an player on the outside, and they have that now in Jameson Williams.
Guy.
And he might be, Scott, he might be even more dangerous like speed horizontally than speed vertically, which I think is scary. Because
those intermediate dig routes, where it's like, oh God, Goff's going to lead him and he's going to house it, or
a rush attempt, and he's going to pick up 15 yards. He's an incredible player. I'm really happy that he's become this version. By the way, like, I think he doesn't become this version on, I don't know, 28 NFL teams. It's specifically unique to Detroit, just how they can get these guys integrated. They can get them on board in the culture, and like that belief, that relentless belief from Dan Campbell and a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, it matters a lot. Before we toss the break,
he might get over 1,000 yards missing time with the suspension.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I know he's pretty close. He's within shouting distance. But all right, before we toss the break, before we get to our last segment, pick this game. Who wins?
I'm just so heart invested in the Lions, man. It's going to be the final team that possesses it's going to win. I'm going to say the Lions are going to win on a long field goal.
I like it. Jake Bates, man of the hour. I'm going to go with Detroit too. I just think that they can problem solve so well on offense against a defense that is going to force you to problem solve, because he has been Brian Flores is. He might be my like assistant coach of the year award winner as well. Good. I mean, he's been so good. But so yeah, he's definitely. I think this offense can problem solve there, and that's what gives
it might come down to how many negative plays the Vikings are able to force against Goff, if they can rattle the cage. Right? Remember, we saw, even though Detroit somehow won this game, think of how Houston rattled the cage against Detroit in that Sunday night game. Goff threw the 5 picks. One of them was a Hail Mary. It really was a 4-pick game, but of course, Houston couldn't capitalize on its scoring potential that day, and they let Detroit hang around. The Lions won the game. But it's ultimately for the Vikings to win this game, they need to have Goff. They need to sack Goff a handful of times, or maybe have a strip sack or a couple of picks or something like that. They can allow some big plays. They need to force some negative plays as well.
All right, we're going to take our final break. On the other side, we're going to rapid fire some contract incentives for you all to watch out for, some milestones to watch out for in Week 18 right after this. All right, we're back for our final segment here. Some other things to watch out for in Week 18, Scott. People are always jacked up about the contract incentives. Maybe we're not giving you betting advice here, but if you want to take some of this and sprinkle in, try to have some fun in Week 18, go for it. Enjoy yourselves. Andy brought us some. I also wanted to give a shout out to at JD Goldboy on Goldboys on Twitter X, where I saw that he had a good spreadsheet breakdown of this. Some players who are close to contract incentives.
Yep, Sal Vetri did a great piece on it too on his Twitter account.
Sal Vetri did a great one as well.
Did a great job on Yahoo all year. So shout out to Sal.
Yeah, Sal's the man, 100%. So I wanted to run through a few that stood out to me. Number one, Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans, as Andy pointed out, have a lot of interesting incentives. Of course, they have the biggest incentive, which is like win the damn game, go to the playoffs. But Mike Evans is like his 1,000-yard streak is within shouting distance. I believe he needs 85 yards for that. He has contract incentives tied to that. He has contract incentives tied to touchdowns, to catches. and he's well within that. But obviously the big one there is win the damn game. So we expect those guys to thrive in Week 18.
Yeah, Mike Evans is already a Hall of Famer for me. He's never missed the 1,000-yard plateau. He would tie Jerry Rice for the most 1,000-yard seasons, I believe. They're going to get there. I know he needs 85, so it's not not a small number. But the thing is, I mean, the last 3 weeks he's got 28 targets. He's a 10 target off the bus guy. The Carolina defense, it's been easier to get. It's easier to get in the rushing attack, but. And I think Mayfield may want this more than Mike Evans does for Evans.
He does, yeah. Well, Baker doesn't want to be the guy. Like, Evans has played with so many quarterbacks, and they've all found their way to 1,000 yards with him. Like, he doesn't want to be the guy that doesn't happen with.
It's happening.
Yeah, it's happening.
But I said Carolina. They're obviously playing the Saints this week. But tell me anything you like about the Saints defense right now. I can't think of anything. It should be a weather-protected game as well. Mike Evans is going to be over 100 this week.
Yeah, and with no Marshawn Lattimore, there's no fight risk either. My favorite one of the week, Scott, and this is kind of weird, so follow me down this rabbit hole, will you? J.K. Dobbins, he has a 150,000 bonus on the line if he gets over 900 plus rushing yards this year. He's got 58 to go despite missing time on IR. And he could really use this money, man. He's got a mere $50K guaranteed salary or guarantees in his contract this year on the 1-year deal, the prove it deal that he signed with the LA Chargers. He has certainly proved it. I'm gonna tell you right now, as somebody that's tried to live on like 50K in Los Angeles at one point in my life, not good. No, it's not easy. I know J.K. Dobbins definitely has more money than I have ever had. So I'm sure he's doing just fine. I'm sure he's not in a studio apartment next to the post office on Motor Ave in Palms. I'm sure he's doing great. But another 150K can go a long way in LA. I think he's within shouting distance of a pretty good one here.
Yeah, I encouraged that his first game back last week, he gets 19 carries, 20 touches against the Patriots. It was good, not maybe electric, but 76 yards rushing and touchdown. It just had, again, it's just nice to see him healthy, right? I mean, he just had the most difficult run out. I thought he was a star player at Ohio State. I thought he was going to be a star player in the NFL, and mainly it's been injuries, but great job by Harbaugh rebuilding the culture here. And I think he's the type of coach that I think he's going to want to steer this to Dobbins. And if it comes down to a couple extra carries to get him over the hump, I think they'll do it. So I think Dobbins will beat this number and deservedly so.
Raiders defense has actually been pretty good down the stretch, but it's definitely one where you can still get them on the ground after Christian Wilkins has been banged up this year. So Week 18 matchup against the Raiders for them. Obviously, the Broncos on the other side. They're the ones trying to get that 7th seed, whereas LA is probably locked in at the 6th seed. So they can't really improve anything there. But I'm with you that Jim Harbaugh, culture guy, he's going to want to try to get this for somebody who has been like. J.K. Dobbins, the Chargers run game's been a little hit or miss this year, but he has been a difference maker. You can tell there's a drop off from him to everybody else in that backfield. So I think they're going to want to reward him. What a great signing for them too. I mentioned the Broncos. We didn't really talk through their game too much because again they're playing the Kansas City Chiefs. But Cortland Sutton, who Scott I think has been one of the most surprising picks at wide receiver this year. He is 82 yards away from 1,065 yards and a $500,000 bonus. He has been Bo Nix's number one target with the bullet this year, and I feel like he will once again against the Kansas City Chiefs backup. So it would be nice to see him get rewarded for a very big season this year.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why he won't make it against that Kansas City JV team. And even though we've seen sprinkling of other guys, Vele's had moments. We saw Marvin Mims make a couple of splashy plays in that Cincinnati game last week, but Sutton is the alpha here. And he did it last year on low volume. This year, the volume has stepped up. Touchdowns came down a little bit, which was to be expected. But Cortland Sutton's a damn good football player and deserves the extra money coming his way.
Yeah, he's a perfect fit as Sean Payton's X receiver, and he runs the routes that Bo Nix loves to throw. Like Bo Nix he will rifle it over the middle in the intermediate and deep areas, and that's where Cortland Sutton was not maximized by Russell Wilson, but has been maximized by Bo Nix. Keep your eye on Marvin Mims, man. He's been a fun player for them, and I hope he gets more playing time because it's been some gadgety stuff, but also some deep real deal wide receiver things for him, he might be like a third-year breakout that should be on people's radars. I liked him a lot as a prospect. He was a mess as a rookie, but they've really got a key role for him, and I hope to see it continue to grow.
One of the catches of the year, that second touchdown against Cincinnati, just outstanding.
And I believe the first touchdown was the deep touchdown was, I think it's the longest air distance, like total distance, not air yards, but from one point to another. I think it's the longest completion of this year. It's definitely up there. Switching back to the running back position, Tony Pollard is 83 rush yards away from a $250,000 bonus for 1,000 yards. Tough to say. Pollard, he's been banged up. They sound like they might rotate quarterbacks between Mason Rudolph and Will Levis. They're also like maybe talking about, hey, maybe Mason Rudolph can start for us next year. No, he can't. You're not gonna. You don't want to be doing that. Mason Rudolph, I don't think will be the next Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield reclamation project, but he's probably going to get some snaps at quarterback for this Titans team here in Week 18. And Tony Pollard, do you think he can make this one? He's been banged up. Spears is probably back in the concussion protocol. What do we think on this one?
Does he need 1,100? Because he's at 1017 right now.
Oh, yeah, 1,100, excuse me.
Okay. Yeah, it's miraculous he's done this because he's been on the injury report all season, and he's just been a maintenance player for them every week. They have sprinkled in Spears. The quarterback play has been so poor. Not that you throw a parade for 4.3 YPC, and I realize that stat has some noise in it, but he was never healthy. It was just so frustrating. He finally got the job to himself last year in Dallas, and he wasn't healthy. This year he hasn't been healthy either, but he's still been a productive player for them. This is the one I realize I've been giving a rosy outlook for most of these props. This is one I think might fall short.
Yeah.
But I give Pollard credit for, I would take one hit in the NFL and probably never walk again. The fact that he's made it through 16 games when he's basically been hurt the entire season, I think and done it with no help from the buoyancy of his offense. In fact, the Titans have only covered twice this year. It just shows what a disappointing team they've been. They need to start over. They probably need to draft a quarterback. So anybody succeeding here? And I realize there's been a sprinkling. Spears has been a good player lately. We had moments with Nick Whisper-Kakine, with Calvin Ridley, with Chico Okonkwo. The last few weeks has been a right answer at tight end, but mostly Tennessee's been a fantasy graveyard. So I tip my cap for Pollard actually being a positive ADP pick.
Another interesting one here before we talk about some rookie milestones. Geno Smith has, this one's from Andy, has 3 very realistic incentives based on exceeding his 2022 numbers, each of which can earn him $2 million. Andy also notes he's been hurt, and it's an otherwise meaningless game because the Rams, their Week 18 opponent, are locked into the NFC West Championship. Seattle's obviously going to miss the playoffs, but Geno can earn $2 million each if he maintains his current completion percentage, he gets a win, and throws at least 186 yards. The Rams have been a beatable secondary at times this year. Jackson Smith-Njigba has been one of the right answers, to use the Scott Pianowski term, at the wide receiver position. So those two guys can hook up. It's on my radar. This might be the last game of Tyler Lockett and maybe DK Metcalf as a Seahawk. Metcalf's going to be an interesting conversation in the offseason. But JSN, man, he's been fantastic. Smith has been volatile at times this year, but I otherwise think he's been a really, really good quarterback. So I give him a chance to at least get a couple of these here.
Yeah, for sure. The big problem there has been the red zone execution. The touchdown rate's gone way down. He has way too many interceptions. A lot of them come from close range, and that's why this game doesn't mean anything for them. But we talked again about failures of quarterbacks, and it can be infrastructure. It can be the wrong situation. It's just been nice to see Geno rebuild his career. He was better in 22 and 23 than he was this season, but a lot of things didn't fall right for this team. At least he's gotten JSN going. And this is a team, look, Seattle's been, they usually have a winning record with Geno Smith at 3 straight seasons. That's something. I think Seattle's one of those teams that could beat anybody. They just weren't consistent enough to make the playoffs. I know he's hurt. He's going to play in this game anyway. I'm a Geno Smith fan. I hope he makes these numbers. Unfortunately, the only guy you wish you drafted here this season was JSN, right? Metcalf's been a disappointment. It just seems like Lockett, it's probably over for him. Smith was a quality backup, somebody you really couldn't trust. Walker's been hurt a lot. Charbonnet's been good when he's played, but you never knew when that was going to be. So an offense that only had one right answer, but I still think Geno Smith is a better than average quarterback.
Last one to talk through here. It's going to give us a chance to talk through 2 electric rookies from this year. We got a chase for the rookie reception record. Malik Neighbors pretty likely going to take the lead in the early window because he and both these guys have, well, Bowers broke Puka Nakua's last week. Neighbors is right there with him. I think he has the current lead, but he should definitely be leading after the early window. Even if they do face the Eagles defense, do the Giants, it's certainly it's going to be a bunch of backups out there. So Neighbors should have a chance to go crazy. I don't think we'll get as historic a Drew Lock game as we got last week, Scott. And I'm not kidding. It was historic. This tweet from Doug at Doug_analytics. Drew Lock's 1.18 EPA per play today versus the Colts is the 6th best of any quarterback since 1999. I want you to guess before we move on to the Bowers part of this. Who's the other play? I want you to guess. I don't know if you've seen the tweet. Maybe you have. Try to guess a few of the quarterbacks here. One name, I'll give you one. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 times this has been done. One guy did it twice. Go ahead and try to give me some of the names.
Manning, Brady, Breeze are the first 3 guys I would think of.
Manning did it twice. Brady was the other one, so that's 3.
Aaron Rodgers?
Nope.
Dante Culpepper?
No. A little more recent.
Lamar Jackson?
Lamar Jackson's the other one. One more.
You
mentioned him weirdly earlier in the podcast. Not playing anymore, but you mentioned him earlier.
I'm sorry, he's retired now?
Yes, he is retired.
Oh, geez.
Compared Joe Burrow to like one of these type of seasons from him.
I can't remember who I was talking
Phillip
about.
Rivers.
Rivers, of course.
So yeah. Drew Lock finds himself in the company of 2007 Peyton Manning versus the Ravens, 2000 Phillip Rivers versus the Denver Broncos, 2019 Lamar Jackson versus the Cincinnati Bengals, 02 Peyton Manning versus that says versus Indianapolis, but that can't be right. And then 07 Tom Brady versus Miami. So again,
shocked Mahomes has never done that. It's interesting.
I mean, Mahomes wishes he was Drew Lock. I guess
wasn't this year. Patrick Mahomes, yeah, he wasn't Drew Lock this year. But and as a Patriots fan, I appreciate the Giants beating the Colts last week. I'm petrified that New England will find a way to beat Buffalo this week and lose the number 1 pick because it's exactly what look. They have 2 stars. May's great. Christian Gonzalez is great. They need so many other things. Give them the 1 pick. Let them trade down. Let them stock up assets. It'd just be maybe get a new coach too. I don't know if Bob Kraft will do that, but yeah, Drew Lock. I will always appreciate what you did. And here's the thing I love about Bowers and what I love about Neighbors because they're playing with lesser quarterbacks. Lock last week notwithstanding, targeted 8, 10, 12, 14 times off the bus as they should be. And Brock Bowers and to some degree McConkey. They were maybe a little, I know everybody was in love with Bowers coming out of the draft, but because Georgia never had to play those shootouts, I think just how good McConkey and Bowers were was maybe a little bit under wraps.
Yeah.
And it's just when somebody can produce the way these guys have with such little help, because again, below average quarterback play, defenses are obviously, especially with the Giants. I mean, at least Jacoby Myers is helping out some with the Raiders, one of the most underrated players in football. But I mean, there's just no other help. No, and I'm a Slayton guy, but come on, everybody knows that Neighbors is the number 1 target in the Giants.
Except Gus Bradley, apparently. Everybody else knows except Gus Bradley. I
just can't wait to see what Malik Neighbors will do with a star quarterback. I mean, we saw, with LSU, obviously, LSU football, they had Burrow, they had Jefferson and Chase together, and then they had Neighbors and they had Thomas and they had Jaden Daniels together. What a blast that's been. Jaden Daniels, what a right answer he's been. Maybe the best ADP beater along with Darnold at the quarterback position. But I just can't wait to see what these guys do next year with better quarterback play. I think the Raiders will bring somebody in. The Giants certainly will. And I did not have any Bowers this year. It's very painful.
Bowers sitting on 108, Malik Neighbors sitting on 105. I think I'd give Bowers the edge on that one.
I got to ask you this really quick. I know we're already running long. Producer Collins probably, swearing my name. We saw Kyle Pitts have a great rookie season. We saw Sam Laporta have a great rookie season. They didn't have, Pitts has been kind of a frustrating player since then. A little bit circumstantial stuff, but Laporta has been, I think, tight end 7 this year. He was drafted much earlier than that. Any risk of maybe a sophomore slump for Bowers?
So here's the thing. I always thought Bowers was a different type of, and I've said this is definitely on record on the pod, that he was a different type of, unicorn tight end prospect than Kyle Pitts, where Kyle Pitts, his uniqueness came because he could line up out at X receiver. It's like, okay, well, great. Then he's the slowest X receiver in the league, and he's never really going to actually create a ton of separation there. It's just a size it's a size speed for his position, but not across the league. That's not like universally cool. For Bowers, it's because you can play him at so many different spots, and that because of that, he's going to create a lot more layup catches. So I don't think so there. And to me, the only reason that Laporta disappointed this year beyond some injuries, and of course you got to mention injuries with Kyle Pitts too. The only reason that Laporta, like we talked Jameson Williams in the last section there. I said in the offseason, like somebody's going to have to get sacrificed if Jameson Williams is going to have a breakout season. Like somebody's going to have to lose a little bit here. And to me, Laporta did end up being that loser. He still had a very, very good rookie, like still the really good season overall on a tight end basis. It's just that he was like, as you mentioned, drafted so high. He finishes like 663 yards right now in 15 games and 7 touchdowns. So it's just he's within what he did last year. I just think it's a lack of targets because somebody was going to have to lose targets if Williams was going to emerge.
For sure. And his yards per target actually went from 7.4 to 8.7. So he's been more efficient. But also Laporta is one of those guys. He's from the George Kittle mode that if you ask Sam Laporta to block for 3 hours, he'd be like, fine, what do you want me to do? He's not hung up on his personal stats and everything. He's not somebody who's going to demand the ball if he has a quiet game. He just wants to win and do whatever the offense needs him to do.
All right, buddy. I think that's going to do it.
That's fun.
It was so fun. I appreciate you coming in today and doing this with us, man. Little bit short notice, but appreciate you doing it. And hey, I thought like might be like kind of a boring Week 18 preview. There's not a lot of games here. Like 70 plus minutes, covered a lot of ground. So shout out to you, Scott. Really appreciate you doing it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And shout out to producer Colin for doing a great job all year. And I've been listening to the show. You guys have been doing a fantastic job. I'm sure, FSWA nominations are on the way. And because, nobody runs the point better than you, Matt.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I appreciate you being back on the show. And it will definitely not be the last time that we hear from Scott during the NFL playoffs. Like he mentioned, there's going to be some great games coming up that we are going to be breaking down. We're going to be doing all of that starting next week. However, for today, that's going to do it. As mentioned before, we're going to be going down to 2 podcasts a week, Monday and Thursday for the NFL postseason. Andy is going to be back on Monday's show to recap the biggest takeaways from Week 18. But more importantly, we're going to reveal some Yahoo Fantasy internal data from the 2024 season, see what major lessons we can learn about some league-winning, quote-unquote, players. Andy is also going to share those season-long fantasy awards that Scott mentioned earlier. But until then, we are out.